This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining this week's NC Spin. We begin by talking about Governor Cooper's veto of a bill that would require sheriffs to obey ICE. What to do with a $900 million surplus the state had at the end of the fiscal year? Our panel debates spending it, saving it, or returning it. And with college football season about to kick off, we kick around the question of whether the NCAA punted on academic accountability. But we won't pass, did you get that? Until we get the panel to tell us something we don't know. Joining this week's panel are Rick Henderson, the editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, Bob Orr, former Supreme Court Justice, Dennis Wicker, former Lieutenant Governor, and Chris Fitzsimon, current director of the Newsroom. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get started. After 2 months of deliberation in the legislature, they've passed and sent to Governor Cooper a bill that would require North Carolina's 100 sheriffs to comply with detention requests from ICE. The bill originated when a number of sheriffs, primarily in urban counties, proclaimed these requests weren't valid warrants and that as the top law enforcement officials in their counties, they could make the decision whether or not to detain some immigrants beyond the terms of their sentences. Dennis Wicker, Governor Cooper wasted absolutely no time in putting his great big veto stamp on this bill. He said it was unconstitutional, mandated that sheriffs do the jobs of federal agents, and it weakened law enforcement by using local resources to jail immigrants who've completed their sentences. What do you think of that veto?
Well, in this instance, I think the governor made a correct call on vetoing this bill. It may make political hay for some folks in the legislature, but I believe that the bill is unconstitutional. I actually think it's counterproductive to what it's supposed to be doing, and that is keeping safe. Sheriffs are charged with keeping the community safe. And in fact, this is going to cause the Latino and Hispanic communities to really be suspicious of law enforcement. I don't think that it's going to help bring about harmony and help in the Latino community. But I'll also tell you, I don't think this is going to be overridden. This veto, in my opinion, will stand. And let me tell you, this Tom was a governor who was at one time an attorney general that stood up and said to the world that those lacrosse players at Duke were innocent. And that was a hard thing for him to do. This is a hard veto for him to do, but he's standing tall for the Constitution, in my opinion.
Bob Orr, you cheated. You actually read the bill and you brought it here to talk to us about it. So what's your take on this?
It's a bad piece of legislation. I think there's certainly parts that are unconstitutional. It's sweeping in its compulsion of local law enforcement to do what ICE or any other federal agency wants them to do. I thought as Republicans we always said the folks at the local level know what's best, and this is imposing unreasonable obligations on sheriffs and police officers. It expands the scope of it, and the removal provision is just absurd.
But the people at the local level do know what's best after we tell them. Now, so far as it goes, Republicans are saying, Rick, this is a law and order issue. I mean, that's what this is, and we're trying to keep violent criminals off the street. But don't the sheriffs sort of already have the power to be able to do this?
Well, they do, and the questions about the bill I think, from a constitutional standpoint, is at what point is an ICE a detention order equal to something that a judge or a magistrate would impose, and that's a constitutional issue there. I think there also is the other question, though, is the fact that the General Assembly does have great authority to set the powers and the abilities of the individual sheriffs, local police, and the like. And so that's where the constitutional matter is going to be settled. And I would not be surprised if we don't see some sort of litigation about this, unfortunately.
Well, every time we turned around, we heard something about this. We heard about the guy in Mecklenburg County who was a child and sex offender, and he was released by the sheriff even though ICE wanted him detained. Is that really a frequent occurrence, or was this a one-off?
Well, sadly, first of all, we have a system where when you're accused of a crime, that doesn't mean you committed the crime. People get out on bail all the time. People make judgments all the time. Unfortunately, sometimes people get out that shouldn't get out, or that it's not in anybody's best interest that they get out, but that's the system we have. Sheriffs do have, as you mentioned, the right to keep dangerous people off the street. No sheriff is going to knowingly release a dangerous criminal with some kind of discretion into the community. And what has happened on the flip side of that, whether you believe it or not, there are literally people who are stopped with traffic offenses that aren't violent, who are there in other counties, who end up being deported, who are no threat to anybody else, and their families and everybody else suffers. The Republicans are trying to make, this is a bill that they're trying to attack Governor Cooper on in the 2020 election. Dan Forrest had a statement out before the veto ink was dry. He was so jubilant about it. The likely opponent for Governor Cooper. This is sadly using, I think, a fear that the president has stoked and a lot of other people to try to help Republicans in North Carolina.
I want to ask my two lawyers on the panel here. The bill says that if the sheriff fails to cooperate with ICE, citizens can institute a process to remove the sheriffs who don't obey the request. You ever heard of anything like that before, Dennis?
No, I've never heard anything about any such of a procedure at all time. I do think it will have constitutional.
Isn't this a slippery slope?
Well, it is a very slippery slope, and it's one that I don't think we want to start down.
Well, it expands. It includes sheriffs. It includes police officers, and it simply says that charges are brought. It doesn't say who brings the charges. Some citizen who feels aggrieved, the district attorney, the U.S. attorney, and it's removal if charges are brought, not that charges are proven under a legal system.
Rick, the Democrats are saying, hey, this is North Carolina's next HB2.
Doubtful, because I don't think it's going to go to the point that we have an actual veto override. I think the idea of recalling public officials from office is really not a bad one, but I think we need to have a constitutional amendment to do that before we make that.
And let's make it universal for all.
Look, to Justice Orr's point, you got to have a process. You just can't say, okay, people, go out there and start removing sheriffs because they didn't do this or this or that. That to me is absurd.
Something things, the term citizen's arrest is
right, it's like Gomer Pyle.
That's right.
Who I think wrote this bill, by the way.
Still got his bullet in his pocket, I think. So what are the political ramifications for Governor Cooper on this thing? Is this going to be an issue? You alluded to this early on. This is going to be an election issue?
Well, of course, that's what it was set up for. That's why this thing was concocted, I think, is to set it up for Cooper to veto it. And so the playbook is working for the majority in the legislature so far. But I would say that the governor adequately described the reasons he did not support the bill and vetoed it. I think politically it'll be a dud.
Okay, but it's a hot potato issue. For Democrats, they face, in the legislature, they face the charges, hey, you're not a law and order guy. You don't care about keeping criminals off the street. Can they override this veto?
I don't know that they're going to do that, but secondly, I think of the issues that are going to determine the governor's race, this is probably second or third tier.
And so far as it goes, I don't think they really care, do they? They've made their point.
They made their point. It will not be overridden.
And with the 3rd and 9th district elections coming up September 10th, will it play out there?
Well, I have a feeling the president will probably talk about it when he comes here for Dan Bishop, as he announced this past week. But that polarizes as many people as it does excites people, and it's going to be fascinating what impact that has on the race.
Let me switch gears. At the just ended fiscal year, our state had a surplus of almost $900 million. The big question being debated today is what to do with it. Now, there's some, namely Republicans, who want to save it. Democrats generally favor spending it. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger and House Speaker Tim Moore favor a proposal to return a large part of it to the taxpayers. They give each taxpayer a maximum of $125 or couples $250, using some $680 million of the surplus. I want to go around the horn here and ask each of you where you stand. Save it, spend it, or return it. Rick Henderson?
Had it come earlier in the fiscal year, I would say probably do some spending with it, perhaps for one-time spending like infrastructure and stuff like that, and sock the rest of it away in savings.
Bob?
I would say save most of it. We may be going into a recession. We have hurricane season ahead of us. I think putting that money away to see what happens in 2020 would be the way to go.
Dennis?
Keep in mind, this is a one-time surplus. This isn't recurring money. That's a very important point in all this discussion. I would say invest it, particularly in education. We got public schools that need built. We have supplies for teachers that are wanting. There are a lot of things you can do with that one-time expense and money.
Chris?
I think invest it. Dennis is right. Ironically, this comes after a session when the House and the Senate and the governor disagreed about how to pay for school construction. Here's $600 million, would build some schools, put it in the bank, start building some schools in areas, repairing schools. We have supplies in classrooms. We have a waiting list for pre-K. I think there's plenty of needs in North Carolina that would be beyond what I do think is a little gimmicky to try to get people to give them $125.
Yeah, well, Rick, when Senate President Pro Tem Berger was alluding to this, he said the taxpayers had sent in more money than the state needed. Do you really think he believes that all the state's needs have been met?
No, I don't think so. But you have to remember what he said was, and he reiterated this at the press conference when they announced the refund, the taxpayers have sent the state of North Carolina all the money the state needs to fulfill the obligations of the budget that the General Assembly passed. More money came in than they were anticipating. And there's always the constant tension between unmet needs and limited resources.
No question.
And so what Senator Berger said the first time, I think, was probably truncated by several people who have said that he made that point. But we did have more money than we needed to cover the obligations in the current budget. The question then is, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Well, another interesting thing, that part of the legislation would have the Treasurer, Dale Falwell, send a letter as part of it. Of course, he's running for re-election. But I was disappointed that the Treasurer and others who talk every day about the unfunded liabilities in the pension plan, in the state health plan, we could make a $750 million payment toward that and not harm anybody, not harm our state budget. How come the Treasurer, nobody's talking about that use of the money?
Interesting. Bob, some of the Republicans are saying, hey, this is just proof positive. This is evidence that taxes are too high in North Carolina. We're getting more money than we're supposed to get. They want to see another tax cut. Is this justified?
In a political season, yeah, it's always justified. Candidly, the needs of our school systems, infrastructure, everywhere we go, we've got a growing state, and so we're going to need more revenue. And I think
we're growing about 100,000 people a year here.
Yeah. I mean, and they're all living in Raleigh, I think. So on I-40. Yeah, on I-40. Yeah, but it's disappointing that bills and laws are driven by how they're going to play in the coming election. People in both parties need to be sitting down and saying, what are the really serious needs that we have
I did a column this week. And by the way, as a disclaimer, I'm supposed to disclaim the fact that I wrote a column on this very subject. It's on our website, ncspin.com. Go read it. At the end of the column, I said, wouldn't it be nice if instead of our political factions in the General Assembly and in government worrying about who was right, and instead worried about doing right?
I think that's very appropriate, Tom, but let me make
I thought it was very wise.
Well, I'll use that word, wise. But let me tell you, there's another point to this that I think we need to know, and that is, remember, the budget is in a stalemate right now, and they're just sitting there in Raleigh. They've been there 2 months. They're really trying to, I think, look at things that bills are getting second and third and fourth looks, and as a result of that, you're going to see a lot of mischievous political things crop up. That happens every year.
Surely not.
Chris, you've been an old hand around this farm for a while. Have you ever seen anything? Is this going to start a precedent that we have a surplus this year, the taxpayers are going to start demanding, send it back to us, send it back to us?
I mean, I hope not. I think the taxpayers want it spent wisely. When we have, we should debate whether or not to cut taxes. And the best argument about not cutting taxes with this money, of course, is that it's one-time money. But even a one-time rebate seems a little silly at this stage when we have so many needs. I hope we'll move on and do the right thing with this money. Either save it, invest it, address unfunded liabilities, build schools. There's plenty of things we can do with this.
Well,
So
you
it would
pretty
help.
well
It would help
covered all the
everybody.
options in
Yeah,
there,
well,
right much. But the Democrats are often saying, hey, this was nothing more than a political ploy aimed at the 2020 elections. It's going to be really nice for the legislators to play Santa Claus, and sometime in October and November, they're going to give you a $125 gift. Never mind, it's going to cost $5.6 million to do this. But is this a political ploy?
Well, they're playing Santa Claus with your money, though. I mean, this is money that you'd sent in to the state for taxes that was an overpayment of taxes. Is it political? Well, of course, it's a political ploy. It's also a policy issue, too, as well. The speaker said during the press conference, once again, we think you, the people, can spend your money better than we, the government, can. Probably a lot of Democrats would agree with that statement, too. But nonetheless, I think that is the theme of it, is that this money was generated by taxpayers. We got more than we needed to cover the current budget, and so therefore we're going to give it back.
Let me go around the table here, and I want to ask each of you. It feels like this train has left the station so far as this $680 million refund is concerned. The House has signed on to it, House leadership. The Senate and Senate leadership have signed on to it. Does anybody want to be on record as voting against sending back the money to the taxpayers, Bob?
No, they don't want to be on the record. It takes political courage. They need to decide what is the most important way to use this money.
Rick?
It's going to get overwhelming majorities in both bodies, and it's going to be a test to see if the governor vetoes it, a test to see if the Democrats will stand up to it.
I'd like to see somebody have an amendment and list schools in rural parts of North Carolina that are literally crumbling and use this money to rebuild them and see how the vote on that amendment would go.
All right. Dennis?
I think that the measure will pass overwhelmingly in both houses, but I think there is a better than even chance the governor will veto.
Do you really?
I do. I think there's a chance. Well, Tom, think, because the Constitution requires a balanced budget to be passed.
Right.
We don't have a budget yet. So here we are talking about we got a surplus without we don't even have a budget yet.
Well, this was last, but this was that's an interesting concept. This was last year's budget for that matter. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see what ends up by happening to this. Switching gears again. Recently, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, better known as the NCAA, decided to punt on a proposal given the association authority to police academic scams aimed at keeping athletes eligible. Now, the issue was first raised after scandals at Auburn, Michigan, and probably the best known recently, the paper classes at UNC Chapel Hill. Bob, this proposal was dropped because the NCAA board, which is entirely comprised of college presidents, wasn't enthused about giving the NCAA that kind of authority. Were these presidents essentially confirming what we've long known, that big money, really sports, rules our universities?
Yes, big sports and big money rule our universities. The NCAA as an organization has plenty of authority. I would submit too much authority over academics on campus. The responsibility for the quality of education that every student gets, whether they're playing football or they're a classics major, should rest with the university leadership. And the problem is, over the course of this country's last 20, 30 years.
Love affair with sports.
Yeah, and the huge monies that are pouring into it. the university leadership is unwilling to try and police the easy
Themselves,
courses, the slide courses that are geared primarily for
And we've all
athletics.
known they were there. I mean,
Sure,
in the dark, dusty recesses of time when we were going to college, they were there. We all knew they were. There was a Senate hearing about this. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut said college sports was a $14 billion business. And he said, one of the most egregious things about it is that most of the athletes are black, but those that are making the money are white. He called this a civil rights issue. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think you could make that argument, but in essence, the full disclosure, Tom, Chris Murphy's wife is in our law firm. So I need to make that
So
point.
whatever it is, he says must
Whatever
be
he
right.
said is right.
Yeah.
You know, the colleges are all about the money, though, Rick. I mean, when you get right down to it, now let's think about recently. Now they've gotten authority to sell beer and wine. They're proposing legislation now to give in-state tuition, to reinstate in-state tuition to out-of-state athletes. The taxpayers, instead of the universities, would be footing the bill for this. The boosters clubs ought to be paying for this, I think. Any justification for more money for colleges?
From the university systems to the athletics department, no. I don't see that justification at all. There are plenty of entrepreneurs, many of them legitimate, who are more than willing to underwrite the costs of these programs. And the challenge, of course, is the equity issue, is that there's a huge distinction between the Big Five conferences, if you will, and everyone else. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Big Five conferences somehow split away, form their own association and set up their own rules. And it basically does mean, and I'm afraid those Big Five conferences are going to suffer a lot academically, but I think that's what the people want.
Well, Rick just gave us a great intro to this because Thursday night, ESPN premiered the ACC channel on television. It's owned by ESPN. And frankly, what's going to end up happening here is they're going to control university and college athletics in the ACC. Last year, the ACC distributed $29.5 million to every one of their member schools, 15 schools, primarily based on rights fees from television and radio. Now the ACC channel says it's going to pay $240 million a year to the ACC.
It's all about money, and you know that this was patterned. I think it's the Big Ten network, right? Was the first one that did this and made a lot more money than that. And this is the entire. A little while ago, when Bob was talking about it's big money, it's really ESPN. It's four letters that has turned this into, you know, tens of billions
they're
of
telling us
dollars.
when games can be played,
That's
what
exactly
days
right.
to play them, the whole business.
Yeah, but all this money is being made by everybody but the athletes,
right.
you know,
That's right.
the talent that goes on the field. And they're supposed to be getting, in exchange for their 40-hour week and health risk, a quality education. We know is not happening.
Final question. Mary Willingham, who's a whistleblower at UNC, testified before this hearing that I was talking about. She says, quote, "When I went to the University of North Carolina as a learning specialist, I didn't expect to have to teach kids to read. I had athletes who were so unprepared for the coursework, they were working on reading letters and sounds. Is it time to call this a sham, this student athletes business, and call it what it is, professional sports that are taking place on our college campuses?"
Tom, I'm in the camp of where we just need to throw this out the window and form some sort of prestigious kind of reform committee to come together and make some sanity out of all this madness. It is off the rails. It needs to be fixed and fixed quick.
Speaking of sanity, it's time for me to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Rick Henderson, I'll start with you.
Okay. There's a non-trivial chance that we will not have a farm bill this year. The House and Senate are not agreeing on whether or not we should have smokable hemp in the state, and because of that, there's a chance that the farm bill debate will go on through next year.
Wow. Bob Orr.
Let's keep kicking UNC Chapel Hill. They made a terrible decision in releasing Associate Vice Chancellor for Campus Enterprises, Brad Ives. He was sort of surreptitiously moved out. He's a double Tar Heel, a Morehead Scholar, a graduate of the law school, successful businessman, and has done a wonderful job over at UNC, and all of a sudden he's moved out.
Well, we'll hear about that one. Dennis, tell us something we don't know.
Well, I'm not sure we don't know it, but I think a lot of our viewers don't. We need to salute one of our very own, Justice Bob Orr, who was selected by the Bar Association for the prestigious McKnight Award. He was a recipient this past year. A quality lawyer, a great judge, an outstanding jurist.
And he's taking us all out to dinner. I think that's wonderful. Chris, quickly tell us.
Right on that parade. House Speaker Tim Moore keeps talking about the governor wanting Medicaid for all, which is a terribly disingenuous plan. The Medicaid proposals for the working poor. It has nothing to do with Bernie Sanders' health care plan.
I've got one. The North Carolina Chamber just named Gary Salamito as its new president. He's been the executive vice president. A great hire. Going to be good for North Carolina, good for business. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Don't forget, you can subscribe to our daily podcast or join our YouTube channel. And next week, we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.